All right, welcome to the Explainer. You know, the stories we tell about our history, the big heroes, the bad guys, all those key moments, they feel so solid, right? Like they're carved in stone. But what we're going to do today is take a closer look and see how those stories are actually way more complex and honestly way more constructed than you probably think.
And yeah, that really brings us to the big central question for this whole explainer. And it's one that might make you squirm a little bit. How much of what we just accept as history is actually a lie? Or, maybe not a lie, but a carefully polished version of the truth. I mean, we all have this idea, right? That history is written in stone. It's a fixed record. It's in the textbooks, it's on the monuments, it's carved right there on the gravestones. It's supposed to be totally permanent, completely factual. You just can't change it.
Okay, but what if the stone lies? What happens when the physical proof, the thing you can literally touch, seems impossible? When the stone itself is telling you a story that just doesn't add up? Well, that's exactly where our investigation kicks off.
All right, Section 1, a crack in the record. So, our journey doesn't start in some grand national archive or a fancy museum. Nope. It begins in a small, pretty unassuming cemetery out in Clay County, Missouri, called Fabian Cemetery. So check out this timeline. It's a puzzle. The gravestone for Squire Boone Jr., and yeah, that's Daniel Boone's brother, it says he died in 1777. Okay, fine. But here's the thing. All the official records are crystal clear that he actually died in 1815. And, to make it even weirder, the cemetery itself, it wasn't even founded until 1836. So this isn't just some typo. This is a real crack in the historical record.
Now, according to the sources for this explainer, this isn't just some random mistake. It's what one expert calls a negative notation. Think of it like a clue that points to a forgotten truth. The idea is that this grave hints at a whole prehistory for this place, a time when people were living and dying here long before the official record started. A history that's basically been swept under the rug.
Section 2, the hero's polished legend. Okay, so this idea that a simple little marker can hide a much bigger, more complex truth, well, it scales up big time. It takes us from this one local mystery to the super polished legends of the entire nation. Because if one gravestone story is off, then you have to ask, what about the stories of our biggest heroes, like the founding fathers? Let's start with George Washington. We all know this story, right? The cherry tree. The diluted fact we all learn is that he was the father of our nation, who famously cannot tell a lie. But the hidden detail? Oh, the irony is just too good. The story itself is a complete and total lie. It was completely made up by a biographer, a guy named Mason Weems, almost 10 years after Washington died, basically to create this perfect, virtuous hero and, sell a bunch of books.
And once you start peeling back that one little myth, a much, much more complicated picture of the man starts to emerge. I mean, for one, Washington was a lifelong slave owner. He had over 300 enslaved people living at Mount Vernon, and he actively used legal loopholes to stop them from getting their freedom. Even his will, which freed the slaves he personally owned, had this tragic catch. It split up the families of the dower slaves from his wife's estate, people he couldn't legally free. And to the Iroquois people, he wasn't some benevolent father figure. They called him town destroyer because of his brutal military campaigns against their villages.
And you see this same pattern of, polishing the legend with another giant of American history, Abraham Lincoln. The myth, the diluted fact, is Honest Abe, the great emancipator, who was driven only by his moral hatred of slavery. But the hidden detail, the more complex truth, is that Lincoln himself said again and again that his number one goal, his absolute top priority, was always preserving the Union, whatever it took. And honestly, you don't have to take anyone's word for it but his own. In a letter from 1862, he wrote this: "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it, and if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. What I do about slavery, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union." I mean, it doesn't get much clearer than that. His actions on slavery were strategic moves. It totally reframes the Emancipation Proclamation. It wasn't just a moral statement, it was a powerful political and military strategy. And the more you look, the more contradictions you find. For example, the Emancipation Proclamation, it was a war measure. It didn't even apply to the slave states that stayed loyal to the Union. For a long time, he supported this idea of colonization, which meant sending freed African Americans to live somewhere outside the U.S. And to win the war, he suspended basic civil rights, letting thousands of civilians be locked up without a trial. All this while battling what we'd now call clinical depression. So you're not looking at a flawless statue. You're looking at a deeply conflicted, pragmatic, and incredibly human leader. Okay, Section 3, a city born from vice. So this whole thing, this simplifying of history, it doesn't just happen to people, it happens to places too. And for this, we're going to look at the really surprising, kind of wild story of how Kansas City, Missouri found its cultural soul. So first, you got to understand this key phrase from back then, a wide open town. What does that mean? Well, during Prohibition, when alcohol was illegal everywhere else, a wide open town was a city where the local political bosses basically just said, yeah, we're not doing that. So illegal booze, gambling, you name it. It wasn't just tolerated. It was openly, systematically ignored. It was the engine of the city. And just to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about in Kansas City, think about this number, over 100. That's how many illegal speakeasies, gambling joints, and nightclubs were booming under the protection of the city's political boss, a guy named Tom Pendergast. They could do whatever they wanted. Naturally, the city became this giant magnet for anyone trying to have a good time and break the law. And this all leads to what's called the Pendergast paradox. On one hand, you have this super corrupt political machine running on voter fraud and profiting from vice. But at the same time, that same machine was providing food and jobs to poor people during the Great Depression. And here's the craziest twist. All those illegal all-night clubs, they needed music, non-stop. This created this massive, constant demand for musicians, and that environment accidentally became the perfect hothouse, the crucible, for a new, revolutionary kind of music, bebop jazz. Yeah, legends like Charlie Parker, they got their start right there, in a culture that was basically built on crime. Part 4, the creative treatment of actuality. Okay, so we've got Paul's ship heroes in cities with these secret histories. So how? How do these simplified, sometimes just plain wrong stories become what we all accept as reality? Well, a huge part of the answer is in how we document the world, a process that has been shaping what we think is true for a very, very long time. Let's look at film. The very first movies were called actualities. They were super simple, just unstaged clips of real life. A train arriving, workers leaving a factory. But it didn't take long for filmmakers to want to tell a story. And the guy who basically invented the documentary, John Grierson, came up with this brilliant phrase for it, the creative treatment of actuality. He was admitting right from the start that a documentary is never just a perfect, clear window on the world. It's always a constructed narrative. It always has a point of view. And the first big feature-length documentary ever made, Nanook of the North from 1922, is like the ultimate example of this. The filmmaker basically gave himself permission to bend boring truth to get a better story. Step 1, he staged the action. The famous seal hunt. Nanook uses a spear, but in reality, the Inuit had been using guns for a long time. It just looked more primitive. Step 2, he faked the location. That igloo, it was a special set with one wall missing so the huge camera could fit inside. And step 3, he even cast the characters. The women playing Nanook's wives weren't his wives at all. They were the filmmaker's own partners. He was creating what he felt was a more essential truth, even if the facts weren't quite right. Okay, our final section, reading our history anew. Once you understand this mechanism, once you really get that even our most factual stories are constructed, that they're narratives, it really changes how you have to look at everything you thought you knew about the past. Think about it. This whole explainer, this whole journey, it all started from one tiny detail that just didn't fit, a single misplaced gravestone. And from that one crack, we saw how the exact same process of smoothing things over, of simplifying, and sometimes of just making things up, was used to build the polished myths of our presidents, all the way to a city's hidden soul, a place where art and culture grew out of corruption and vice. And it all points to one single powerful idea. The story is never the whole story. So this leaves us with one last really important question that you have to ask yourself.
Now that you see how it works, what creative treatments, what little myths, what convenient omissions, what polished-up legends have shaped the history that you believe is true? The past doesn't change, but reading it clearly means we always have to be looking for the story behind the story.